stumble to the kitchen, pour myself a cup of ambition, and yawn and stretch and try to come to life.
It's Office Hours Live. Coming to you from Berkeley. Here we are in my office. I'm live, and you're live, and we're all live. And it's 9 to 5. And what a way to make a living. That's what I keep saying. We got to turn Dolly Parton off, but I'll tell you what, if any of you knows Dolly Parton, will you please communicate to her that I really want to meet her. I'd like to have her on this little Facebook show, but even without the Facebook show, I mean, just coffee or anywhere. Dolly? All right, today we have a lot to talk about. This program is about, and share this. Make sure your friends, acquaintances, Republicans, everybody knows that we are on live right now, and we're going to take your questions in a little while. Also, there's a little button, I think, somewhere up there that you ought to push if you want to subscribe. I don't really understand the technology. A couple of things going on. First of all, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, a debate tonight. That debate is probably, well, it's in the shadow, obviously, of the upcoming, in the reverse shadow of the upcoming Tuesday's New York primary. But they're going to be debating a lot of things, and I have heard from people in the Hillary Clinton campaign that one of the things she wants to talk about is Bernie Sanders' comments about busting up the banks. And as some of you might remember, he was asked by the New York Daily News how he would bust up the banks. He said that he didn't know exactly how the Federal Reserve would do it, but he was going to do it under the Dodd-Frank Act. And he got a lot of criticism from it, and Hillary Clinton says he doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, actually, Bernie is right. The Fed has very questionable authority, direct authority in terms of breaking up the big banks. I'll get to that in a moment. But it's irrelevant to a president. What a president has is authority under the Dodd-Frank Act. It's not under the Fed. It's under the Dodd-Frank Act to initiate proceedings. So Bernie was exactly right. Bernie, you did it right. Which gets me to this. This is a problem. The big banks. The big banks failing. We have sound effects today. You know, we have an audience crowded into my little office here. The big bank, this is important in terms of the debate Tuesday. It's also important that you know. Because the big banks, biggest banks, five biggest banks, or five of the biggest banks on Wall Street, just failed a very important test. They were supposed to come up with what we're called living wills under the Dodd-Frank Act. In fact, they were supposed to come up with them years ago. Dodd-Frank, 4 years, the Dodd-Frank Act has been outstanding. They were supposed to come up with living wills that described how they would wind down their operations in the event of another financial crisis. Well, it turns out that when they first were supposed to do this a few years ago, they did not come up with living wills that passed muster. All the regulators said, no, you've got to go back to the drawing boards. And they went back to the drawing boards, and they came up with living wills again. And the living wills that they came up with for the five of the biggest banks, including J.P. Morgan Chase and Bank of America and Wells Fargo, if they failed again. And now the regulators have to decide what they're going to do. But look, here's the important point. Under Dodd-Frank, they were supposed to come up with these 2 years ago, and if they didn't pass the living will test, then the Federal Reserve and the Oversight Board in charge of the big banks had the responsibility as well as the authority to bust up the big banks that failed again. So what are they going to do? Now that they failed again, are the regulators going to bust up the big banks? Well, probably not. And that's why you need presidential authority, and that's why a president like Bernie Sanders has got to be there to actually pull the trigger, because these big banks are never, ever, ever going to be busted up. They're much bigger than they were before the financial crisis. In fact, the biggest banks before the financial crisis, the five biggest banks, had 33% of all banking assets in the United States. Today, the five biggest banks have 44% of all banking assets in the United States. Which gets us back to the election. Here we have exactly where the candidates are. On the Democratic side, here is Hillary Clinton. You need 2,383 delegates to actually win the nomination if you're a Democrat. She has 1,289 pledged delegates through the convention, through the state primaries and the caucuses so far. She also has 469 superdelegates. Now, superdelegates, as you know, are party insiders who she's already got to agree to vote for her. Bernie Sanders has 1,038 pledged delegates, and he has only got 31 superdelegates. So you can see where we are, but you can also see the importance of these superdelegates. And a lot of people ask me, well, why is it the Democratic Party has all these superdelegates and the Republican Party does not have superdelegates? And the reason is, you go back to campaigns that a lot of people who are Democrats and a lot of Democratic insiders still remember, like the McGovern campaign. And they were afraid ever again of having that many outsiders or maverick candidates that might take over a convention. So they wanted a buffer against the mavericks, and that's what superdelegates are. They are insiders. But the irony is, if you have a year like this, and I think in the future in which you're going to have more and more of an anti-establishment surge in this country, not just among Democrats, among independents, among Republicans, then insiders who dominate or have that much influence over who a party is going to nominate seems incongruous. It seems undemocratic, doesn't it? Yes? Meanwhile, we get up to these guys, Trump and Cruz. Hey, this is a nonpartisan live Facebook office hours. But right now, this campaign, this is all billionaires against billionaires. I mean, really, you have Donald Trump, who's has unlimited amounts of money, basically, for this campaign. And then you have Ted Cruz, who's being backed by a handful of billionaires in order to make sure that Trump doesn't have enough delegates to get to the convention with the nomination. But these billionaires who are backing Cruz don't really want Cruz to be the winner. I mean, they're backing Cruz so that there's a brokered convention, so that the Republicans don't have Trump as the winner going into the Republican convention. What they really want from a brokered convention, which means essentially the pledged delegates, once nobody wins on the first round of voting, the pledged delegates are all released. And that means that you're going to have somebody else who is going to emerge. Hey, let me speak. This guy is Paul Ryan. Now, Paul Ryan said just yesterday, I think it was, or maybe the day before yesterday, I don't want to be president. I am not interested in being president. But remember, this is the same Paul Ryan who, when people were talking about him for Speaker of the House, said, I don't want to be Speaker of the House. I'm taking my name out from being Speaker of the House. He is now Speaker of the House. Does that tell you something? When a politician says, I don't want to be blank, Speaker of the House, President, whatever, what that really means, translated into normal English, is, I am so excited and so obsessed by the possibility that I might actually get whatever it is, and I want everybody else to know that a lot of people are talking about me for that office. And Paul Ryan is the establishment candidate. John Kasich of Ohio might otherwise be, but Paul Ryan is more reliably establishment. And that's why he is likely to emerge as the Republican candidate. Here's where things stand right now on the Republican. You can see Trump with 745 and Cruz with 529. And again, you need 1,237. I don't want to bother you and bore you with all these numbers, but you should also know that the New York primary, Tuesday, is quite significant because there are a lot of delegates at stake in both parties in the New York primary. On the Democratic side, the New York primary, you should know, is a closed primary, which means that if you are an independent and you are not a registered Democrat, and it's too late to register as a Democrat if you're not already registered as a Democrat, you can't vote in the New York primary. And a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters have been independents, which may tell you something about the New York primary. You also have the governor of New York and Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City, and all of the Democratic establishment in New York, and all the newspapers, the New York Times, etc., all supporting Hillary Clinton. But strange things have happened in this campaign up till now. I am not predicting what is going to happen, but I am predicting that Monday will be tax day. Tax day. Are you cheering? You like to pay taxes. Do you like to pay taxes? You know, Oliver Wendell Holmes, the great jurist in America, say taxes are the price we pay for a civilized society. So can I just hear it for tax day? But look at one thing you ought to know. If the Republican candidates are going to make tax day even more miserable than it is right now for you, unless you are extraordinarily wealthy. Because, for example, Donald Trump wants to change the highest marginal tax rate from 39.6% down to 25%. And what that means, if you are in the 1/10 of 1% at the very top, that means you are going to have a tax cut of an average of $1.3 million a year. Donald Trump is rewarding you. And Cruz is not that much better. He wants a flat tax of 10%, which means that everybody who is at the top, who's paying more, is going to pay much, much less. And everybody who's paying less at the very bottom, they're going to pay more. That's what a flat tax means. A flat tax means you are probably going to get screwed. Okay, on that optimistic, upbeat note, I am going to try, instead of the worst of the week, we're going to have the best of the week. Let's hear it. Best of the week. This is the best of the week. Nebraska. Why is Nebraska the best of the week? You might ask yourself. Nebraska is the best of the week because the Nebraska legislature just decided against gerrymandering. It does not want to have gerrymandering anymore. It's going to take the decision about how to construct those districts that are so important out from under the politicians and put it under an independent commission. Now, the governor hasn't yet signed off on this, but this is important. You know, this is a movement in the right direction. This is a movement toward good government. It's away from taking votes away from people. We ought to celebrate Nebraska. Good going, Nebraska. Yay! And finally, continuing that upbeat note, I just want to mention something about our Kickstarter campaign. Actually, I want to take some questions, and then I'm going to come back to Kickstarter. Your questions, please. Your questions. Please. All right. David English. Okay, David English, you say, ah. That's how you start out your question, David? Ah. Your office hours are always like at 6 a.m. Seoul time. S-E-O-U-L, not Seoul. Not Seoul time. And Seoul time. You're in Seoul, South Korea, David. And I never get to attend. Well, get up earlier. Next question. No, David, that was not disrespectful. I just mean, you know, if you want to be live, the rest you're just going to get in line with the rest of us here. Thomas Morrison, I love your work, Robert. Doesn't adding the superdelegates to the pledged delegate count constitute a criminal act of fraud by the media? Oh, you say, you know, because the media are not distinguishing between pledged and superdelegates. I don't think it's a criminal act of fraud, Thomas, but I do think that the media should be careful to distinguish because, again, those superdelegates have not gone through any primary or any caucus. They don't reflect the will of the people. They are just reflect the will of insiders. So you are right that the media should be making that distinction. I tried to make the distinction just now. Christine Angelos, will you please explain the difference between a republic and a democracy? Is it because the U.S. is a republic that we have delegates who decide presidential elections and not the popular vote? Christina, this is a kind of epistemological question you were asking, a definitional question that is very complicated. I would simply say, yes, we started out as a republic in the sense that direct democracy. We don't all have a direct vote, and I'm not even sure. I mean, can you imagine, what would you say, Christine? Would you like if we had a presidential election in which you could choose on your computer, or everybody could choose just by pushing a button, and every issue that came up before Congress, you could just choose directly? Well, that would maybe be too much direct democracy because there wouldn't be an opportunity for deliberation. We do delegate to representatives and senators certain responsibilities, and that is more like a republic than a kind of platonic democracy. But we've got to, I think, seek as much democracy within those boundaries and bounds as we possibly can. That's why I'm concerned, and I was before Bernie Sanders began being a delegate, about superdelegates, about the lack of democracy in that superdelegate process. Kelly Scott, as a professor at UC Berkeley, what have you found to be the biggest concern among college students regarding the upcoming election? Well, Kelly, many of them are very enthusiastic. I've not seen students as involved, engaged in a presidential election in many years. They were very engaged and involved in the election of 2008. Many of them were Obama supporters, but that was because they were excited about Obama himself, his personality, his race, his charisma, who he was. The students who are very involved and engaged today tend to be Bernie Sanders kind of enthusiasts, but they aren't enthusiastic about Bernie Sanders because of his personality or his charm or his good looks or his wonderful sense of humor. They are excited because of the message of Bernie Sanders, which is that we are on a path right now that we've got to reverse, a path toward increasing concentration of income and wealth and political power. It is bad for our economy. It is bad for our democracy. It is undermining everything we believe in. And that's why, and students believe that, and they're right to believe that. Arlene Edmonds, do you think there should be a new People's Party outside the blues and reds that we have now? I assume, Arlene, you're talking about Democrats and Republicans. A new People's Party. Well, you know, it's very hard to start a third party in this country because it's a winner-take-all system. And so if a third party comes along, chances are they're going to draw votes away from one of the two dominant parties that is closest to that third party. We've seen that again and again. But on the other hand, if you have a situation in which the establishment wings of both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party dominate and ignore the non-establishment wings, and the non-establishment wings that really want to get rid of crony capitalism, that want to reform and get big money out of politics, then you conceivably, and that may be the case, we have a third party that is dedicated to ending crony capitalism and reasserting our democracy. Eugene Matuzov, did I pronounce it correctly, Eugene? How does Democratic Socialist Bernie address the wrongs and crimes of socialism evident in the history of the 20th century? Eugene. I mean, look, you're talking about what? What are you talking about? Communism? You're talking about Stalin? I mean, these isms. Can we just put aside all these isms? The real issue is, what does a candidate stand for? Bernie Sanders is not talking about the kind of communist or socialist or even European socialism directly. He's talking about democratic socialism, specifically in the form of a single-payer health care plan, which most experts in this country who look at it say, yes, we need a single-payer plan. It would be much more efficient. And Bernie Sanders is talking about tuition-free for public higher education, which is what we practically had in the late 1960s. That's the direction we were going in. That's not radical. And he wants to end socialism for the rich. And for the big CEOs and for the big corporations, corporate welfare. That seems to me to be a step in the right direction toward capitalism for the wealthy and for big corporations. So don't get caught up in the ism stuff. Ann Klein says, you know the Clintons, you worked for them and with them. Are they as egregiously awful as some of the press paints them to be? Dishonest, out for themselves, and look, Hillary Clinton, as I've said many times before, would be, in my view, the best candidate for the system we now have. I think Bernie candidate would be the best candidate to get the system we need, and that system we have now is dysfunctional, and in many ways it is corrupt. But I don't think Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton are egregiously awful or dishonest or out for themselves. You know, we've got to take down the tone of acrimony, particularly Democrats. I mean, I have Democrats who are angry with me for supporting Bernie Sanders and angry with Hillary, and others who are angry with Hillary Clinton. We're going to need each other. We're going to be opposed, Donald Trump possibly, or Ted Cruz possibly, or if I'm right, even Paul Ryan. I mean, these are right-wing fanatics, and we've got to get together here. Okay, Jennifer Aragon. I'm very disappointed in you for supporting Bernie Sanders. Well, what did I say? All right? Jennifer, I'm sorry you're disappointed in me for supporting Bernie Sanders. I'm disappointed in you for being disappointed in me. All right, Sam Kornbluth. People seem to be focused on the Republicans and the coming civil war this summer in Ohio. What about the Democrats? Do you foresee a brokered Democratic convention in Philadelphia this summer and a possible splintering of the party if the DNC runs roughshod over the will of their pledged delegates? Sam, I think that even though there is a lot of acrimony building up in the Democratic Party, I don't see it kind of bursting forth in Philadelphia this summer. And I think there's less likelihood of a brokered convention, frankly. We'll see. We're going to know a lot more. Bernie Sanders, as you know, has won 7 out of the last 8 primaries, caucuses, and if he does better than most of us, looking ahead, again, political prognosticators in this election have been proven wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong. But most people looking ahead at the New York primary think Hillary Clinton will win because it's a closed primary and because the newspapers and all of the Democratic machinery are behind Hillary Clinton. But it could be, we all might be surprised. Lots of people are asking this question. Why save capitalism? You mean you're talking about my book?
Yeah.
Saving Capitalism. Why save capitalism? And also the documentary we're working on. Why save capitalism? I'll tell you why we have to save capitalism. Look at every system in the world, even so-called communist China, is essentially a capitalist system in the sense that they are moving toward or already have private property and free exchange of goods and services. That's what capitalism means. And once you actually understand that capitalism is almost the universal system. I mean, North Korea, we might have an exception there. Cuba is moving toward capitalism. Once you understand that, the real issue, the practical issue, is not capitalism versus another ism. The real practical issue is what kind of capitalism. Do you have a capitalism that is working for the vast majority, whose circle of prosperity is widening, whose democratic responsiveness is growing? Or do you have a capitalism like the capitalism we have here in the United States moving in the opposite direction, where almost all of the gains increasingly are going to the top, and when political power is also at the top? And I think that we've got to reform capitalism. We've got to make sure that it works for all of us. We've done it before in this country. We've done it a little bit in the 1830s. We did it between 1901 and 1916 in the Progressive era. We did it again in the 1930s in the Great Depression. We had to. We did it again to some extent in the 1960s. Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, the very important pieces of legislation that were represented by such things as Medicare and Medicaid and the Environmental Protection Act. I mean, we can take the rough edges off capitalism and make capitalism work for the people. Did I answer your question? All right. Daria Rylkova. To reduce inequality and maintain employment, is it necessary to also introduce a cap on the maximum earnings, including bonuses and stock options, or the fraction of maximum to minimum wage within an industry? Daria, you're talking about CEO pay. CEO pay has obviously gone through the stratosphere. I mean, the typical CEO of a big company in the 1960s was earning about 20 times the typical worker. And then in the 1980s, the typical CEO of a big company was earning about 100 times that of the typical worker. And now, the typical CEO of a big company is earning 300 times the pay of a typical worker. And that not only is demoralizing to a lot of people. I mean, they say, well, I'm working in this company, but everything's going to him or her or the top executives. But it's also bad for shareholders because shareholders are losing out. A lot of the profits of the company are being pocketed by the executives and the top executives. It's a bad system. It's a perverse incentives system. We need to move back to the kind of capitalism that we were moving toward in the first 3 decades after the Second World War, which I would call, instead of kind of shareholder capitalism, stakeholder capitalism. In which there was a much more concern on the part of a company for stakeholders other than top executives and even shareholders, where communities were thought of as part of the responsibility of big corporations, and also, importantly, workers. I could go on. There's a lot more to say about this, but nobody wants to hear me just blather. Casey Burns. Hi, Robert. Hi, Casey. Here are some observations from the flute-making trenches. Flute-making. Casey, you make flutes. Well, that's interesting. And there's a flute-making trench. All right, last year I had lots of high-end orders for instruments, flutes, $1,100 and above. Casey, this is fascinating. I've never talked to anybody who is a flute maker. This year, hardly any orders starting in January. In general, does it seem like the economy is worse this year compared with last, or is the economy in some sense on hold until the election is sorted out? Well, Casey, I don't know much about the flute industry, but I can tell you that the economy actually is not growing very much, if at all. Retail sales are down. There are a lot of warning signs around the economy, even though the unemployment figures look better and better, but what the unemployment figures don't show is the percentage of the possible workforce, people in working age who are not in the workforce, and median wages. The typical family is actually earning less adjusted for inflation today than that typical family was earning 16 years ago. So I'm not surprised that people are running out of their savings. You have a big baby boom generation that are within sight of retirement. They need to start saving. And so a lot of people are not out there buying flutes or anything else because they are either saving or they can't afford it. 2/3 of Americans, 2/3 are living paycheck to paycheck. So this is what we're seeing is the consequence of an economy growing more and more and more unequal. And that should concern everybody. It should concern CEOs and people at the top, because who's going to buy all the stuff that these corporations produce if not the giant American middle class and below? 70% of the American economy is consumer spending, but consumers don't have the dough. Even Sand. That's your name, actually. It is. Even Sand. Evan Sand. Just got Saving Capitalism. Great book. Thank you. My question is, do you believe that a carbon tax would be a good idea? Evan, I do believe a carbon tax is a good idea in terms of reducing climate change. But we've got to make very, very sure that it doesn't mean higher prices for people in the bottom half. In other words, we've got to make sure that if there is a carbon tax, it is not regressive in effect. It doesn't take a bigger bite out of the paychecks of people at the bottom than people out of the top. And that's going to take some work. And we have last question. This better be a good question. This is from Julia Gillespie Goulan. Julia, this is the last question. So you better make this a good question. This campaign has offered us the opportunity to change the course of history. Can you give us an idea of just what it means to you? In other words, to me. We are so grateful for you. Well, thank you, Julia. I think that this is a critically important election. Oh, I didn't even put up my sign. This is about the New York primary coming up. I bought this. I thought it was sort of good, kind of New York primary mood setting, and I didn't even use it. And Julia, I'm concerned about the fact fundamentally that the nation is moving toward more and more concentration at the top of wealth, income, and political power. And this election is the first time we've seen through Bernie Sanders, and at the opposite extreme. I mean, Donald Trump is a very different creature, obviously, but the public is making a decision between authoritarian populism, very bigoted and very, very scapegoating, represented by Donald Trump, and democratic populism, represented by Bernie Sanders. And that's a critical time for us in the United States. And it's not going away. Regardless of who wins the nomination and who wins the election in 2016, this force, this anti-establishment populist force, is going to continue to grow in the country because we are continuing, unfortunately, to see more and more concentration of income and wealth and political power at the top. And so I expect that we are going to have this choice in a larger and larger way between authoritarian populism in the future or democratic populism. And I hope we take democratic populism, which reminds me, I didn't even say Carla Johnson. I want to thank Carla Johnson. Carla Johnson, you said, I just wanted to tell you how much I've been enjoying your Thursday office hours on Facebook. I'm learning lots, but I notice a deficiency. You are not wearing enough Bernie swag, so I knitted you this Bernie beanie. Carla, I thank you so much. This is a Bernie beanie from Carla. Thank you, Carla. And on that note, oh, yes, I want to say, also, don't forget Kickstarter.
Woo!
This is Saving Capitalism. This is a documentary we're working on Kickstarter. We're 50% to our goal. After 8 days, we have 22 days left. Get on the bandwagon. This is about you. We want you to join us. Go to savingcap.com/Kickstarter. Please join us. Join in. I also want to give my thanks to Zoe Umlaut Beck and also to Yael Bridge and for their great help, and for all of you who tuned in, and for the thousands who are here in my office today. And come back, please. Come back whenever I can find the... Come back next week. We're going to have another half hour, and I've enjoyed seeing you, and hey, have a good week. Everybody have a good week. Bye.